I'm going to read two lines from Justice Alito's letter that he sent to Dick Durbin and Sheldon Whitehouse, and that he also sent to members of Congress. Quote, "My wife is fond of flying flags." I invite you to say that several times, quickly, 7 times. "I am not. My wife was solely responsible for having flagpoles put up at our residence and our vacation home and has flown a wide variety of flags over the years. She makes her own decisions. I honor her right to do so. My wife is a private citizen. She possesses the same First Amendment rights as every other American. She makes her own decisions, and I have always respected her right to do so." But let's be clear, Ian, his wife can make decisions about flags, but women across America can't make decisions about their bodies when it comes to reproductive rights. Explain the hypocrisy, please.
Yeah, I mean, the standard here is not my wife did it, so it's okay. Like the legal standard is that Alito is supposed to recuse if his impartiality reasonably could be questioned. And so if you look at someone's house, there's constantly these political flags going up. You look at Alito's behavior on the bench. You know, it's not just that he's putting up silly flags. He's also the most unapologetic Republican partisan in his actual work on the court. And I mean, I want to be careful here because I don't think that anyone should diminish their career or diminish their ambitions because of who their spouse is. But, you know, when I started law school, I sat down with my wife and I said, look, like, I'm going to be a lawyer. I have certain professional obligations. And so there'll be some things I can't tell you. And that's just part of the burden of, you know, of being an attorney or being married to an attorney. The burden of being married to a judge is much, much greater. You know, you have this obligation not to create the appearance of partiality or the appearance of any kind of impropriety. Sam Alito's been a judge for 34 years. And so I just don't understand what's going on here that, you know, both of them don't understand the professional obligations in play.
Ian, how much of this, though, rests at the feet of Chief Justice John Roberts? It's his job as a part of the Supreme Court to make sure that administratively and otherwise, even more importantly when it comes to ethical issues, to make sure everybody's minding their P's and Q's. The fact that he declined to meet and he claims, well, it's only one party that's asking to meet. It's not really a global concern. I mean, it's an unchecked, offensive kind of response to the American public.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Roberts is sort of operating in a world where the Supreme Court can act like it's above it all. And maybe there was a time when the Supreme Court could do that. But what I think that Roberts doesn't understand, what I think Alito doesn't understand, is the rules don't just exist to protect us from biased justices. The rules exist to protect the justices from themselves. You know, the reason why you don't go flying political flags outside of your home when you're a judge, the reason why you don't create the appearance of partiality is because then people, including United States senators, start reasonably starting to question, well, wait, do we really want to defer to these people? You know, do we really want them to, you know, to not have any political scrutiny? The reason you don't do it is because when you're a powerful political figure, and you start engaging in inappropriate ways, the New York Times starts looking into you, and you don't want that. So again, you know, these rules exist. I mean, they exist to protect us, but they exist to protect the justices as well. And the fact that the justices, or at least Alito, is willing to blow past these, it doesn't just undermine him. It doesn't just raise questions about whether we can trust this court, but it casts a dark shadow on the entire Supreme Court as an institution.
You know, Ian, there was a time that I will confess to everybody who's tuning in that I thought this idea of expansion of the court was just crazy. I also thought that there wasn't enough deference that was being given to the highest court in the land because it is the Supreme Court. But now I am all for court expansion. I am all for the appointments that the Biden administration has done historically when it comes to changing the face of the bench. But I'm tired of the hand-wringing. So I'm asking you, what are the solutions? Because the federal judges below SCOTUS have incredibly stringent and appropriately so ethical obligations where they shall recuse if there's even the hint of some type of impropriety or, you know, some type of improperness going on here. So I'm tired of the hand-wringing, Ian. So what do we do?
So there's lots of things Congress can do. You know, they can add seats to the court and then Biden could fill them. They could strip the court of much of its budget. They could strip the court of some of its jurisdiction. I mean, Congress has lots of authority over the Supreme Court of the United States, but none of that's going to happen now. And the reason why none of it's going to happen now is because Republicans control the House of Representatives. So, I mean, I know there's a lot of folks calling for Dick Durbin, the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, to hold hearings, to do political theater. And, you know, I don't know, maybe political theater will matter to some voters. But ultimately, the moment that will decide the future of the Supreme Court and whether we have potentially, you know, 7 or 8 Alitos on the Supreme Court is the election. If Donald Trump wins, he's going to fill that court with Alitos every time there's a vacancy. And if Joe Biden wins, not only can he appoint justices who are very unlike Samuel Alito, but if he has a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate, then we can maybe talk about more aggressive reforms to make sure that Alito doesn't wield the kind of power that he does.